Thank you for joining us here on the ice, brought to you by Pembina, Source for Sports, and Caisse Financial Group. Today's episode, we still continue to look at return to play, those guidelines, as well as what we could see in the present, not so distant future of talking about Canadian junior hockey, specifically the western side of it, from the Winnipeg Ice all the way down into BC and the southwestern states. We would like to welcome Mr. Shawn Mullin, the past host of the Swift Current Broncos, as well as a great member of the community in Saskatchewan that knows a lot about the junior hockey scene, what it looks like now and what it will look like in a couple months when the puck finally drops. So let's please welcome Shawn Mullin on the ice. With me now, Shawn Mullin. Shawn, thanks for taking some time. How is Saskatchewan looking? Are they getting some thunderstorms? You're getting some beautiful weather. How's it looking out there?
As we speak now, it's an absolute gorgeous, beautiful, sunny day. But as someone who's not from Saskatchewan, I was taught when I first moved here just over a decade ago, if you don't like the weather in Saskatchewan, just wait 5 minutes.
And what happens in 5 minutes will always be a conundrum or a massive mystery. Who knows?
Exactly.
So, you're based in Swift Current still?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us what it was like broadcasting or being the play-by-play with the Swift Current Broncos. That's got to be a pretty cool scene, seeing these up-and-comers from a young age, making it up, and then seeing how their elite status could be once there to make it to the NHL.
Well, from a personal standpoint, it was an absolute joy. It was always my goal in life, actually, to be a broadcaster. And from the point that I was 3 or 4 years old, I wanted to broadcast hockey. So when I got the opportunity, first in trail with the BCHL Smoke Eaters, and then to move up to the Western Hockey League with the Swift Current Broncos, it was quite literally a dream come true. And the experience was a wonderful experience. You get to travel all throughout Western Canada, and you mentioned the United States as well, meet a ton of people, learn a ton about the sport from other broadcasters, from coaches, players, and fans that you make contact with, make friends. And you mentioned seeing the players develop. And it was amazing to watch. You know, I think of one of my favorite examples, Jake DeBrusk, who's now a National Hockey League top 6 forward, making good money, was drafted by the Broncos in the 7th round. He was 5'4", 120 pounds at the time. And nobody thought he had a chance, let alone make the NHL, to even make the Western Hockey League. And little do you know it, genetics kicked in. His dad's a huge man. Jake didn't get as big as his dad, Louie, but he ended up having, great dedication, great effort, got better, got bigger, became a 40 goal scorer in the Western Hockey League, got drafted in the first round of the NHL draft by the Boston Bruins, and we see him on TV during this most recent season being interviewed by his dad in one of those great moments. It's wonderful to watch those things happen, those stories that you don't necessarily expect. And to get to know these young men on their journey and watch their dreams come true, and not just the NHL dreams, but the opportunities that come, the friends they make, the university path they might take. There's a lot of great stories from being involved in the Western Hockey League for sure, and it was a great experience. And ultimately, the biggest thing about it, I think, was getting to know the community. Made a ton of friends here, and when the Broncos won the championship a couple of years back, the connection I felt with the fans in Southwest Saskatchewan was the highlight of my career for sure.
You've touched on so many different avenues I can go from here, Shawn, from whether it be talking about, the link with universities. Let's talk about that one maybe, because a lot of people don't really know how, junior hockey works with USports in years of eligibility, and how you see players go into junior hockey and then later take a couple of years and go into USports and play the Canadian university hockey. How does that work, if you could help us explain that perhaps?
Well, I can't give you the full details of exactly the, how the policy works in and of itself. But ultimately what they did years ago was decided that the Western Hockey League wanted to leave their student athletes with an opportunity to move forward with their education once they were done in the league. So for each year that a player plays in the Western Hockey League, they get a year paid for in Canadian university in USports. Now, some guys will sign contracts that allow for a more guaranteed education when they're first signing up as draft picks. That's my understanding anyway. And, for some people, it might just be one game they played in a year that got them a year of education. So then they can translate that to going to USports. Now, there is a rule about when you have to execute that time. There's a certain amount of time that you have to get it done by before it expires. So you'll see players that'll go kind of test the waters in minor pro hockey and pull out of that a little bit sooner than they might have otherwise, because they want to make sure they can still use their eligibility in USports. But I'll say this, Canadian university hockey, which is in real jeopardy right now because of COVID, and I hope comes through it. I mean, we're seeing even the most prestigious program in the University of Alberta pull the plug on next year. But it is wonderful hockey, for one, highly, highly underrated. You see these guys play, some of these teams are as good as any NCAA teams. And part two, it's actually a decent route back to pro hockey. You see players that are kind of bubble guys sometimes choose the minor pro route before going to university. But if you go to university, get your education, get out of there at 23, 24 years of age and played high-level hockey the 4 years in between, there's lots of opportunity to continue to play. Guys like Andrew Burnett or Joel Ward still ended up in the NHL, and many others have gone on to play minor pro or in Europe. So it's a great way to go while also getting your education. And there's more certainty for Western Hockey League guys that they're going to get that education taken care of than if you go the junior A route and just kind of hope you're going to get scholarships, because there's no guarantees there.
That is a major route you talk about. There's so many different eligibility circumstances that occur, whether you pick junior A, staying in the AJ of the BC, or you go to, WHL or CHL hockey, or you go to USports. Being a Western grad, I remember Steve Ruchin in his picture showing up at Western and how he had a great run with the Mighty Ducks back in the day.
Stanley
The
Cup
OUA program. Pardon me?
I think he won a cup there. I can't be sure.
He was in the finals that 1 year, but I don't think he won the cup in the 06.
Right.
But you talk about the OUA setup and how that works with USports, and then you talk about the devastation of losing not only hockey but volleyball and other sports at U of A. That's a very prestigious USports student-athlete program in essence,
right?
Considering its location within Calgary, Edmonton, Banff, the hotbeds of hockey is specific in Edmonton and Calgary. That omission, I mean, sure, it's only 120 student athletes, but it's 120 student athletes among 3 potential strong programs of sport that are now gone for the next year. Who knows what ball will fall next, whether the different province takes into play. We've already seen USports cancel football for the fall. Hockey,
before this all happened, even the Lethbridge programs got canceled before even COVID was the reasoning. So there's some scary moments right now. I think part of the problem is people just don't value USports enough. And I don't know what the process would be to try to change that. I mean, I was just in the United States this summer visiting a friend of mine in Chicago, and it amazed me how in Chicago, which is one of the biggest cities in the world, but there'd be bars dedicated to different American university teams. You could go to 2 or 3 bars that were Nebraska bars in Chicago. The way they're passionate about university sports there. I'm not saying we're going to replicate that here necessarily, but we've got wonderful athletes playing at a very high level in USports, and there isn't even 1/1000th or 1% of the excitement for USports that there is for university sports in the States. And I know it's not quite the same level, but there's wonderful athletes, and somehow we have to appreciate it more because it's going to be gone otherwise.
You're absolutely right. We mentioned the different tournaments in the States. The Beanpot comes to mind as an annual weekend of Boston University, Boston College, all those schools up in the northeastern coast of the United States. There's no reason why the OUAs could do the same thing, for example. There's no reason why you can't see that excitement, but the excitement just isn't there, whether it be nostalgia, whether it be tradition, whether it be the formation of tradition. I don't know what the answer is. Do you?
I don't, but if you could, if I could sit here and tell you how to make somebody passionate about a sports team or a sports league, then I'd be making a lot more money than I am. Yeah. It's hard to say what's going to catch on. Why are people passionate about something? What makes them passionate? But whatever's been done so far to promote it hasn't worked. So somehow they've got to change the narrative a little bit. But what I can tell you is the sport is very good. The athletes are very good. It's a high level of competition. It's very entertaining, and nobody seems to know. So if there's going to be a future for it, they need to do a better job of finding a way to promote that. And, you know, we as sports fans really need to give it a chance because there's so much to it. I mean, we don't seem to have the same tie to our universities in Canada that they do in the United States. I mean, I went to Carleton, and, you know, I kind of half-heartedly cheer on the ultimate university basketball dynasty.
Yeah.
But I don't have that same, you know, passion and excitement about my school that they do down there. So how do they change that? I'm not sure, but I wish there was a way to get more people excited about it, because it's something I don't want to see us lose.
No, and it's a very strong it's a strong proponent to university sports here in all of Canada. It's not a geography thing, I don't think, because I mean, you can still support your home team, you can support your alumnus team, you can booster your friend team. I remember traveling when I was at Western, going to hockey games, football games. I'd travel up and down that Eastern board, and I loved every weekend.
It surprises me a little bit that in the universe we're in now, where television rights and live sports are, you know, an absolute primary focus for television, because it's the one thing you can't, you know, tape and watch later and skip the commercials. Why university sports hasn't been picked up more. You know, we've got 2 major sports networks with hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of time to fill, especially now. But I mean, just in general, you know, they're still airing darts and strongman competitions. I don't know why there's not a place on one of 5 channels for university hockey in Canada. And once you give it a platform and you put your weight behind it, that's what helps create interest, tell stories, get people excited. Right now, they have no reason to. And if you're one of those major networks, to me, you know, there's an opportunity, a completely unexplored area of the country in terms of sports, where you could shape the narrative and create a fan base, I think.
You hit the nail on the head. I'm surprised with the mentions of all these cancellations of fall sports. One of those conglomerates, those big boys, didn't decide to cover that a little bit more. And you mentioned it. There could be something that possibly could be done in the near future in properly marketing and brand messaging it. We even could talk about we could talk about the CFL, but that's a whole different sport altogether, because they themselves are going through an interesting situation now without returning. And, you know, a lot of these sports, their income is based on fan support. If there aren't fans in the stands, a lot of these sports cannot function. Well, they cannot be profitable.
That's a real reality that a lot of people aren't talking about, and I'm surprised in that we see, the National Hockey League and Major League Baseball and the National Football League and the NBA. They're talking about coming back with, you know, empty arenas and empty stadiums. Well, these are all leagues that have major corporate partners, that have television contracts, although the NHL is not that strong. So I think them having a season without fans, a full season, not just playoffs, would be really in doubt to me. Yeah. But, you know, baseball still had to have a major negotiation with their union to make this possible. But if you're the CFL, if you're in particular junior hockey or university sports, the reality for these programs is without fans, you cannot possibly function, period. You know, there's no empty arena sport happening at that level. They're kind of in no man's land, because if you're minor sports and you don't need fan support, you don't have to worry about that, you can go ahead and play. If you're major professional sports and you can make adjustments so that you're basing your revenues and expenses off of your television, you can go ahead and play. But if you're in that no man's land in the middle, like junior hockey is, there's going to have to be a substantial change in the allowable groups of people for that season to go ahead. And I'm still I don't want to say very pessimistic, but I am pessimistic about it, about the possibility of there being 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people allowed in a building by October. And if they're not going to be, these leagues can't function. They need fans, period. That's the source of revenue. That's the major driver. There's no other way.
We're going to look at the cup maybe half full right after this quick break. We'll be back with Shawn, but when we focus back on junior hockey, and the tremendous change of events that began for the now Winnipeg Ice to the Kootenay Ice, and how great their season was looking before things got shut down. We'll be right back on the ice.
At Super 8 Winnipeg West, we have your comfort in mind, with free Wi-Fi and free daily Superstart breakfast. We also have guest laundry facilities, a state-of-the-art fitness center, and a jetted hot tub. Sleep well in a spacious guest room equipped with plush new bedding, a 50-inch flat-screen HD TV, microwave, mini refrigerator, and Keurig coffee maker. Or book a suite with a kitchen, ideal for extended stays. Super 8 Winnipeg West, located just inside the perimeter on Portage Avenue.
Back with Shawn Mullin, who is residing in Swift Current. We talked about Jake DeBrusk, Louis DeBrusk, father-son scenario relationship. What other players, any other players in Swift Current that you'd like to watch? I mean, we just saw the Hall of Fame induction ceremony go down, or the mentions. Jerome McGinley was one of those players that was undersized going into the dub. I mean, and the size he became, being quite a great player, 1,300 points. Size does matter, but at the same time, what other famous, stories do you have coming out of Swift Current, Shawn?
Well, another son of an NHLer would be an example. And Adam Lowry, he was a 4th-round draft pick by the Broncos and couldn't skate at all when he was younger, and was kind of an awkward body. And nobody worked harder than Adam. He got into power skating. He made his skating at his size a strength, and you guys know him in Winnipeg. Yeah. He was the most valuable player in the Western Hockey League at 19 years of age, and the change he made from 16 to 19 to become the dominant force he was, and he'd play 30 minutes a night as a centerman, get double shifted on the first and fourth lines, top power play, top penalty kill. He was everything. He wasn't a great face-off man. He was a winger, and Mark Lamb says, I want to make you a centerman. So he goes and works at it, becomes one of the best face-off men in the league. So just that dedication to get better in the areas where he was deficient. You have to have the physical skill to begin with, but ultimately the guys who are going to make that leap and make that evolution are the ones that see what's wrong in their game and put the time in to fix it. I'm not a big fan of 365 days a year hockey. Don't get me wrong about that. But if you're going to make it to the next level, those guys are great examples of seeing the holes in their game and putting the time in to make the difference and moving on to the next level because of it.
Making that next level, making that difference. James Patrick follows Kootenay back to Winnipeg, to his hometown. We see the Ice have a tremendous surge in wins, almost a complete 180. Yeah. I think they had 18 wins last year, and they finished with 38 this year. I mean, talk about how a team is able to transform like that, and what was so different between last year in Kootenay to this year in Winnipeg?
Well, junior hockey, for one, is unlike professional sports, where there are some big roster turnover. In junior, you can have almost complete roster turnover, not just on your team, but on other teams. So one year, you're at the bottom of the league, and you're very young, and you're struggling to get wins. Then the next year, you return a whole bunch of your roster. You have a little bit of excitement, and the teams around you lost, the veteran teams, lost the major components that led to their success. But just from that point on, there's an evening out of the playing field if you've done your job in developing those players. And, James Patrick and the coaching staff and the management team brought together a really good core of young players when they were still in Kootenay, and they did the work. They didn't try to take shortcuts. They didn't bring in a bunch of veterans to fill those holes. They let the young guys play and go through their, tough times. And that paid off with how they were able to turn things around last year. I'll be honest, I didn't see the Ice being as good as they were last season. I thought there was still some, learning curves ahead, and had some ups and downs. Don't get me wrong, but they were way ahead of where I thought they would be. And I think that's, again, kudos to the management team for finding the right players and for the coaching staff to put in the time and develop them the right way, so they were ready to make that leap when there was an opportunity. The East Division was certainly a little bit weaker last year than it had been. So again, there was a hole for them to slide in, and they had put the time in. They have some very talented young players. I mean, Peyton Krebs is an absolute stud. Connor McLennan had a great year. Isaac Johnson had a great year. Made a big move, Liam Hughes, midway through the season, which was very helpful because their goaltending was a real problem in the early going. So that was a smart addition. And you see the success they had last year, just with some slight adjustments. And then you think of the 2 first-round picks they had in 2019, and the high draft picks that they're going to bring into their lineup down the line. This is a team that has a very bright future in Winnipeg.
That alignment in the East Division, it didn't change much in terms of the geography and where you're playing, because it's not that much further out of Brandon. But you said it's like a cycle or a cyclical motion where you have one very young year and then you start building that maturity, and we see that with every team in the CHL.
Well, I'll give you the example. 2 years ago, when the Broncos won the Western Hockey League Championship, the top 3 teams, in my mind, in the entire league were in the East Division. Swift Current, Moose Jaw, and Regina. Yeah. And Brandon was a top 10 ranked team in the country that year too, until they traded away some of their guys, kind of seeing that it wasn't going to be possible to make a run that year as deep as the division was. So you have teams that are that good all at the same time, then their veteran players are going to cycle out, and all of a sudden the division's a little weaker, and the Ice were a struggling young team for a few years. Then they're in position to kind of make some strides and move ahead. Now, that doesn't just happen because of turnover. You still have to develop and pick the right players. So they still deserve credit for doing that. But you can turn things around in junior a whole lot faster than in other levels. And that's what makes it fun to be a fan, because it doesn't take a 10, 12-year rebuild like the Edmonton Oilers. You can turn things around in 2 or 3 years if you make the right moves.
I have to ask this question with regards to seeing players get drafted into the NHL and they come back to their respective teams. Do you notice a difference in their behavior and their manners when they're on the ice?
I think that's player to player. What I would say is there's an adjustment period usually for the first 2 or 3 weeks. And I think part of it is the speed is a lot lower and the precision's a lot lower. So some of these guys have been used to, having the puck on their stick all the time, being the one to lead the way, and all of a sudden they're in a strict, tight system where everything's got to be perfect when they're playing in the NHL at training camp and in preseason. They come back and it's not quite the same, and the speed's a little lower, and you're not getting that pass at the exact moment you would have. It usually takes them 2 or 3 weeks to readjust to the role they have before being the player they were. So a lot of times you'll have media people be like, what's wrong with Peyton Krebs, or what's wrong with whoever the case may be, when they just came back from the NHL? They should be tearing it up here. Well, what you were doing in the NHL, trying to learn how to play on the 3rd or 4th line in 40-second shifts, is a whole lot different than being the number 1 center on a junior team.
You mentioned that case in point, Dylan Cousins, who was playing for Lethbridge, I believe, this past year. He came back from his NHL training camps, and I went to watch his game against the Ice earlier in this year, and I said exactly the same thing. And I was like, no, you know what? It's just a different environment that he has to reestablish himself in. It's not like he forgot to play the game. It's just the fact that he was training at a different level, in a different environment, a different perspective, asking to do different things. Now you see what he does. He lights it up in 4 minutes of play, and you're like, okay, there he is again. And
there's a little disappointment, too, because I don't care who you are, these guys who are drafted at a high, 1st, 2nd, 3rd round guys, they've never not made a team, right? Mm-hmm. What team has Dylan Cousins not made? So when he went to Buffalo's training camp, as much as everyone's telling him, Dylan, you're going to be back in Lethbridge. Dylan, you're going to be back in Lethbridge. He's going in there being like, I make every team I try out for. This is my goal. I'm going to show them that I belong. Kirby Doc did it. Other guys have done it. So when they get sent back, it's human. They're 18 years old. you're going to have a few moments of disappointment because you wanted to be there. You wanted to be at the highest stage. So it takes them a little while there too, sometimes.
Yeah, we're coming to the end of June, almost the month of July. We're seeing Team Canada doing some virtual training, some online training with their men's and women's programs.
Sure.
We talked quickly before the break about teams moving forward with and without fans in the stands. In terms of an organization and from the back end, not the product on the ice, Shawn, how do you see hockey returning administratively for the junior ranks and whether or not it's feasible or not?
One, I'll say I'm pleasantly surprised, but surprised that to this point I haven't heard a lot of layoffs in junior hockey. I mean, I know how hard junior hockey staffs work, and B, how little they get paid for how hard they work.
Yeah.
And so, I'm very glad that it hasn't come to that in most places, at least that I've heard so far. But I'm also surprised because the realism in the back of my head keeps saying, I don't know if we're going to see hockey anytime soon. And as much as they have their plan to operate by October, and things have been steadily improving COVID-wise in Western Canada, we're nowhere near 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people in the same building yet. We're still talking about groups of 30. So if numbers tick up the way they have since things have reopened, and there's going to be large gatherings throughout the summer, I fear that governments are going to be nowhere closer to saying that by October. And then what about the border? I don't know if we're even remotely close to opening the border with the United States. Well, we have 5 teams in the Western Hockey League that play in the United States that have players from Canada. What about the import players? Can they even come to the league at this point? But all of that matters a whole lot less than just having fans in the stands, because these leagues can't operate. Some people have said to me, well, what about pay-per-view? Pay-per-view is a loss. This is a thing that they do so that fans can watch the games. It costs them more than they make off pay-per-view. So even additional people watching won't come near to covering any of their costs. What is sponsorship? Sponsorship is for fans in the rink. If they sell sponsors, it's to have guys, fans in the rink looking at their rink boards or their ads on the big screen or the promo they're doing that day. What about merchandise? People buy it at the rink. What about food? Same thing. So the whole business model for the Western Hockey League is designed off attendance. And it won't be good enough to have 500 people. It won't be good enough to have 1,000 people. You need to be able to have, in buildings like Swift Current where the capacity is only 2,900, you've got to at least be able to operate with 50% capacity to even come close to functioning. And they have maybe the easiest travel schedule in the league based on where they're located. So, what's Prince George going to do, traveling 6 hours at least to any game if they can't have fans? Yeah. So I'm very hesitant right now to be, overly optimistic about the season. And they have to move forward. They have to plan. They have to hope and knock on wood. And I really want to see hockey. I don't want them to cancel it. I'm not, a naysayer that way. But am I optimistic? I'm not, because you need to have a completely different reality for that to happen than the one we're facing right now.
The reality we're facing now exactly isn't the most optimal for hockey to return or sports to return with fans in the stands.
And let's be honest. Manitoba right now is maybe the strictest province in Canada in terms of their regulations. Yeah. And they still aren't allowing outside the province visitors.
Very little, yeah.
Washington State and Oregon are 2 of the most left-leaning states in the United States. And as a result, we've seen, Democrat states are less likely to open up for those types of things than Republican states are. So that's what we're dealing with in Washington and Oregon. And I'm not making a political comment, good or bad. I'm just saying, Is it realistic? And I don't see those states opening up to fans anytime soon. And then our players going to be allowed to go down there. You're allowed to move between the border if you're traveling for work. But we just got through a long lawsuit explaining that these players aren't actually working, that they're student athletes, right? Yep. So I don't know. There's so many hoops to jump that I'm worried. And I would say I would be surprised if there's hockey before January, but don't come to me in October when the puck drops and say in your face, because I'd be a real happy guy if it did.
I would be happy to see hockey return on time with fans, of course. Without fans, I understand. The power of the $1 spent equals $7 around the rink. That's always been that common denominator when it comes to concessions, merchandise, transportation, other forms of entertainment, restaurants, you name it. That is what's going to be missing the most from all of these small towns that host one of these junior teams, not just in the West, but everywhere in Canada. And at the same time, it's an entertainment value that's going to be missed too.
But the restaurants and the hotels are absolutely, they've already suffered, and they're going to suffer more, because I don't see, with sports coming back, we're going to see travel. We're not going to see a lot of interprovincial travel, even in minor sports. We're not going to see a lot of overnight travel. So the restaurants might do okay, but not as well. Hotels are going to be decimated. The amount of money they make off tournaments and overnights for, just minor sports. And the Western Hockey League is one part of that, and it's in the mix there. The other junior leagues are too. But I think we're going to see as little travel as possible at all levels of sport, and that's going to trickle down to all these different aspects of communities that rely on them.
As much as we've discussed the number of hoops that have to still be jumped through, and concerns and unknowns we face come September and October, is there a form of, obviously there has to be some form of optimism, whether it be a small percentage or not, to say that, hockey will be coming back. We just don't know when and to what capacity.
I think it'll be coming back. Whether it comes back this season or not is the question. And, we had quite a discussion about this on my podcast, WHL Unfiltered, with the former head coach of the Moose Jaw Warriors and Kamloops Blazers, Dave Hunchak, who was just as skeptical as I was about the possibility. And then you start talking about what are they going to do then? Because these players can't afford to just have a year where they don't play and develop. So there's going to have to be some kind of, in the areas where the players live, informal senior, juvenile type hockey for them to play. I don't know what they'll do. There's going to have to be something, though, because they have to keep developing and playing. You can't just go a key year in your teenage years without playing and without getting better. As for the league itself, junior hockey is not going away. This is not the death knell to the sport, a naysayer or doomsdayer like that. It's just, will there be a year next year? When will it happen? And how much red ink will the teams bleed before that happens? Because if you're keeping all your staff and all your expenses without revenue, there's going to be a point where they're going to be forced to take some action.
Right.
You only pay these people because there's fans in the stands. And as soon as there aren't, that's a big problem. And there already wasn't playoffs, and there already wasn't the last couple of weeks of last year. So there already wasn't a Memorial Cup. And the Western Hockey League was the host of the Memorial Cup this year. So all those teams were relying on getting some of that money. So there's financial hardships for sure.
Well, let's not worry about financial hardships. Let's take it one step up a little bit, Shawn. Let's talk about, the NHL is talking about coming back. They've set some dates up for the end of July. They're looking for that playoff run to begin. Is this sort of like a test project / template to see how effective this will be without fans? And then will junior hockey be able to use a lot of what the NHL is using to then formulate their next steps forward?
I guess, again, I think it's apples and oranges.
Okay.
There's a couple of factors of why. One, we're talking about playoffs for the National Hockey League. So at this point in the season, they've pretty much paid the players already. So the major expense of salaries is covered off. You get paid for the regular season. So that part of it is not as big of a deal. Plus, their television contract will be dependent on playoffs. Playoffs drives TV deals, drives ratings, drives all that revenue, right? So they have to get a playoff run done in order to get that aspect of their deals. So there's a ton of money on the line for the league without a ton of expenses because, again, the salaries are already covered. So getting the season done, a lot of people are saying, well, why are they so focused on trying to finish last year when we're already talking about July, August, September, because they need to complete the season to get that playoff TV revenue. As for a way forward beyond that, I think the NHL would be, of the 4 major sports in the U.S., the one that would have the most trouble coming back for a full season without fan support or with limited fan support, because they don't have anywhere near as lucrative a television contract as those other leagues do. So I don't know if the NHL is going to operate until fans are allowed to come back to the rink. And we could see no NHL regular season hockey again, I think maybe until January, depending on how things go here. As far as a template to follow for junior, and we can see sort of how they operate in terms of safety protocols and how are players allowed to see their families and all that type of stuff. But in junior, you wouldn't be able to isolate. I mean, you're going to billets who have kids that go to school and have billet parents that go to work. So that's something that those teams won't be able to control at the junior level the same way they're able to control at the higher level.
Oh, Shawn, you've definitely cleared a lot of what I was questioning, because you got it, you've seen it, you understand it from that perspective, and I thank you very much for joining me today on the ice.
I wish we were talking more about hockey itself. That's just that's next week's episode, I think, Shawn. Right. We talk about, we have to talk about this because this is the foundation. This is the groundwork, I think, that really some of us may or may not understand. And without the foundation, there's no reason to talking about rosters or movements or players or trades or anything like that, because we may see announcements coming up in the next month whether or not the border may not be open until further notice. Wow. We may see interprovincial movements not opening or functioning to allow teams to travel the way they will. And it's unfortunate that junior hockey is at the answer to other higher mentionings or other bodies without being able to have control of their own destiny. Well, another aspect of this, I know we're sort of heavy on time, but if it gets to the point where the season has to be delayed or, hopefully not, but called off potentially, the amount of staff members on junior teams that are transient, most of these guys and women, outside of like maybe, your stores or your front office types of roles, but your business managers, your coaches, assistant coaches, scouts, and general manager types are not necessarily from the places that they're working. So if you have to lay off a big percentage of those, they're going to go back home. They're going to seek employment somewhere else. And by the time hockey comes back, that could completely shift who's involved in the sport. So it could be a real mess. I hope it isn't, right? This is just, worst case scenario guy running around here. But I'm skeptical, and I'm really crossing my fingers that the numbers are going to be in our favor so that we can see the puck drop in October as the WHL is planning, and we can see some of the best young players in the world again.
It was truly a great thing to watch here. Members and fans that were able to catch the ice here their first year, to see that product in person and live was amazing. Shawn, I want to talk more next time with you with regards to, rosters and player changes and how that works a little bit more, because I know that's more our focus. But I felt it was a great discussion with you today, like I said, dealing with the foundation of our current state and moving forward, because I think that truly is the groundwork of starting something. And I think I would like to say we meet you again and discuss this further later in the month, perhaps in July, and talk about what's going to happen with the teams, with the divisions, and with maybe some more information we can learn between provinces and borders and whatnot.
Well, and Winnipeg is the one team I haven't seen play in their home building in the Western Hockey League.
Well, you got to wait one more year because they're still building it.
But I haven't even seen the current one because last year was the first year in 9 years that I wasn't a broadcaster in the Western Hockey League. Yeah. So it's a trip that I'll have to make, and I would look forward to making, and really glad to see the team having success there, and hope it continues to, because the Western Hockey League definitely belongs in Winnipeg.
It was the last major city team with an NHL team without a junior hockey league team.
Right.
It was bound to happen. So I'm glad it did. Shawn Mullin, thank you very much for joining me. We'll talk to you next month. We'll talk more about players, I promise.
All right. Thanks to you.
Right on. Shawn Mullin from Swift Current talking with me on the ice on Amateur Sports TV. Check out Coffee with Graham Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, 10:30 on ASTV. Have yourselves a great day, and thanks for watching.